can see it. Don't worry, I can see it. I can see this one. No, give me. It doesn't. Am I supposed to clip this or is this not necessary? Priscilla, can drop it back. All right. Um, yeah, I want to dedicate in this speech because it's not going to be my final one. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. There is something about every single social movement in society, and what is uniform to every single one of them is that they are fighting for being oppressed. They are fighting for being disenfranchised, and things like this. But something that is expected of every single social movement in society is consistency on their principle. That is what makes them legitimate. That's what makes them legitimate social movements in society. There's now a problem with feminist movements. For far too long, feminist movements have failed on this particular principle because they are inconsistent. Why? They say because they don't have things like manpower, they don't have things like enough resources, they won't advocate for anything other than the women alone. So it means on this particular principle, they're already failing on the first principle of every single social movement to be consistent in their principle of fighting for all oppressed people in society. How does society then view social movements in this particular light? Final note, every social movement will face backlash, we agree that will happen. But what social movements like feminist movement face is totally different and unique. This is what it looks like. The backlash feminist movement with the narrative of being selfish. And how does this happen? Because patriarchy has the media power, they have resources to be able to do so. They are able to control the media, and that women only care about other women and do not care about the oppression of other people. That they are selfish, and they have been able to prove this particular narrative by finding outliers of feminist movements who go on Twitter and say, "Oh, we hate men. I will kill all men. I don't want to have a male. I don't want to have a male child." They exacerbate this particular narrative to prove that all feminist movement is bad and they only care about women and they are being selfish in that particular light. We think this is bad for the feminist movement because it spreads the narrative that women are toxic and they hate men. The impact here is that it then reduces the legitimacy of feminist movement being a social movement who wants to fight of the feminist. Like, what does the priority look like? The priority looks like actively advocating for all oppressed people in society, solidarity with other social movements, consolidation of shared suffering and things like that. What is the objective of the feminist movement, and why do we think this is consistent with their principle? Number one, they want to fight for women who are oppressed. But why are women oppressed in society? The first reason is things like patriarchy. Second, that's like just one thing. The second thing is political representation, societal acceptance, breaking cultural norms, disenfranchisement, social abuse and stigmatization. All these things are the reason why feminist movements are oppressed. But then look at every single social movement that also exists, or every single minorities. They also suffer the same problem. Things like Black Lives Movement also are disenfranchised. They also lack political representation. Other minorities all over the world. It means they share a common struggle. They share a common problem. If they are not finding solvency at the end of the day, they have no reason, but they have no incentive but not to fight it together because they get solvency together at the end of the day. I think the first thing here is on solvency, right? How do we get solvency on our side of the world? But before I go on, is there any clarification? Is there any POI? Could you explain what you mean by intersectional categories? I think intersectional categories just has to do with any other social movement that is being oppressed. Black Lives Movement, LGBTQ, whatever they have, name them. As long as there are social movements that are being oppressed, they fall under this particular category. Let's then go on. The solvency here is that, number one, direct benefit to women. Why is this true? The thing here is that women are represented in every single social movement that exists. Things like the Black Lives Movement, there are Black women there as well, who are not just suffering for being women, they are suffering for being Black women in the West. All these particular things like LGBTQ, transgenderism, women are represented in every single facet of social movements. What this particular thing means is that if they then combine effort and gain solvency, there is direct benefit to women in those particular movements, which means we are getting direct benefit to those women anyways. And this guy, like this, already like weighs over anything that they want to prove that, oh, maybe we are not getting solvency. As long as we are getting solvency as an intersectional category of political movement, we are getting it for women that reside in those particular in those other movements as well. We get direct benefit in that particular instance. But secondly, which proves the first one, on combined force of power, we think it is very, very important because the feminist movement, like, it is known, they lack resources, they lack acceptance, they lack support, and the only reason why they can get support is to increase their legitimacy in society. In a way where they can prove to society that they are consistent with their principle, that they can prove to society that they are not selfish. That's the only way they get acceptance by society. If they don't get acceptance, they get acceptance not just from other intersectional categories. They get acceptance from people who ordinarily think they are selfish, who ordinarily think they are bad and actors in society, who just hate men and want to get power over men. The impact of this particular argument is that we are able to get a combined form of acceptance from society that these individuals are for good and they want to help the entire society. But secondly, they're also able to get more resources from philanthropists who would ordinarily want to help them, because they spread this narrative that, oh, if I help you, I'm helping people who hate men. I'm helping people who would rather have an abortion than have a male child. That's the narrative that they spread, and we think we are able to break down this particular narrative by spreading the narrative that, oh, we fight for all oppressed people, we love all oppressed people, and we're going to do our best to make sure that all oppressed people are break out of like disenfranchisement and oppression at the end of the day. We then get the form of combined form of force of power that then translates to things like political representation. It then means that people that support black side movements in politics, people that are feminists in politics, people that are transgender in politics, LGBTQI, or whatever social movement that you have, are able to like fight for women from those particular positions, because they now see women as allies in that particular instance and not enemies that they have to compete for representation for with and things like that. It then means we get more political representation for women because they get more solidarity from these particular individuals. But secondly, we get more force from society. It means when a woman is being oppressed, when she cries out to society, everyone is going to stand up for her and not going to see her as another bitter feminist that is just crying for acceptance and attention. All this particular thing means that we get more political vote in society. That means we can then successfully run the agenda that, oh, we want to fight for more women rights in politics, and that is my agenda as a politician. So vote for me because I want to do that. Vote for me because I want to fight for all oppressed people in society and not just women. It means more women get we get more political buying and they get more policy changes at the end of the day, because the only reason why they can get political buying and political change is when they have the manpower and the numbers in House of Representatives and whatever policies are being made. It then means this is the only way they get allies. This is the only way they get solidarity. This is the only way they get support in this particular instance. We need to break the bad narrative from patriarchy that these guys are bad, these guys are selfish, and they only care about themselves. We have to be consistent with our principle that we fight for all oppressed people, and at the end of the day, as long as we are able to break the barrier of oppression for every single minority, we are good as a feminist movement. We are proud to propose.
Okay. Me, I go actually dedicate my speech because I don't see magic happen before. So in case, guys, Pio, I'll just put your hand up. I'll eventually get to you. Hopefully, I don't have a lot of material to go through. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, now. Social movements do not advocate for everyone who's oppressed in society. This is a fucking lie. This is like saying that the Black Lives Matter movement should go and be advocating for poor white people. Social movements are intrinsically selfish. They are defined by the specific values and individuals in societies that they push for. It doesn't make sense to then put the burden on the feminist movement, for example, to start defending other people, especially when the feminist movement is primarily about women. But the second thing to talk about here is, why does the feminist movement need to prioritize women over other social classes? I think the idea here is that women are one of the most oppressed social class, regardless of anything like intersectionality. This means that there is a greater responsibility to uplift women, at least to some point of equality, than there is a responsibility to uplift any social class. The intuition pump for this is that a black man is likely to be treated better than a white woman anyways, regardless of the fact that they have differences in race and gender. I think the next thing to point out here that's very messy within their context is that, oh, the patriarchy is going to paint you badly because they have control of media. I think one, the patriarchy is going to paint you badly anyways, regardless of which system you use. What doesn't make sense is why aligning with other people that the patriarchy likely hates then means the patriarchy is likely to paint you in a good light or do anything. In fact, to probably legitimize this even more. So the feminist movement, for example, aligning with the LGBTQ movement is where you're likely to have more religious backlash against the feminist movement, which means that you are shut out of those spaces. This is the first impact that we pursue from OO. The idea that certain levels of intersectionality are likely to alienate not just people outside of the movement, but people within the movement. Panel, every feminist likely believes that women need rights and women are oppressed. Not every feminist believes in things like the LGBTQ or transgenderism and the rest of these things. We think that while this is somewhat regrettable, what is most important for the feminist movement is to work on points of cohesion. What happens in a world where you necessarily do this is that you alienate significant parts of your movement, and you spend too much time trying to generate that internal cohesion that you're never able to achieve long-term impacts anyways. So it means at a point where you constantly do this, it's more likely that people don't even opt in there. But the reason why this is problematic is that sustainability and internal cohesion are a prerequisite to any other thing that you want to achieve as a movement. So if you're too busy fighting yourselves internally or working to clarify policy internally, you have no means by which you can achieve anything externally. But the second thing to talk about here, relax guys. Second thing to talk about here is why this divergence and division is so important, because what are the classes that are likely to be prioritized? The comparative here is that you can't look at every social movement every time to just use intersectionality for. It means that they likely have to prioritize different people at different points of their campaign. But the means by which you determine these priorities are likely to do with classist ideas around who's likely the most attractive movement to you, or who is likely to be something that the people who are at the very top of the movement are likely to buy into. So it means that it's more likely that you have something of a classification or a classism where the people who are more likely to benefit from this intersectionality are people who exist within the wider world. Why is this problematic? Number one, it means that you don't affect the most impacted people within the feminist movement. Instead, you spend more time on things that are ideas that are maybe more attractive to people who exist at the top of the echelon. This not only betrays the movement, but also means that people who themselves opted into the movement because they needed that protection from you, as compared to people who maybe don't need as much protection, are the ones that suffer even more. The reason why then this is worse for the feminist movement as a whole is that you not only get the external backlash that these guys talk about as being so bad, which will exist anyways, you also get internal backlash within the movement where people say this is not what I opted into. But I think the other clarification here is that this is a priority. So what this means is that regardless of whether the skin color or the sex of a woman, if a woman is suffering, the feminist movement is always going to defend her when the priority is womanhood and stopping the problems that have to do with womanhood. What they need to defend in their world is why the feminist movement has an incentive to defend a black man, because you necessarily have to be intersectional and care about other oppressed people even when they don't exist within your movement. The reason why this is extremely more problematic is that we already explained to you that by the nature of the patriarchy, women are the most oppressed social class in all of society. What this means is that you spend more time, even as a movement, catering for people who, number one, likely already have some protections, but number two, you have no way of guaranteeing that these people likely even care about you or likely opt into your movement. This is where you're more likely to expend resources that then even come back to bite you in the back. What's your PI? I already explained this. The feminist movement is going to cater for all women, right? The priority in our world is womanhood. So this is saying that if a woman is suffering, regardless of her sexuality, regardless of her what she identifies as, regardless of her race, we are going to prioritize her and prioritize social cohesion to make sure that you get these things here. But next thing to talk about here is exclusivity. Panel, the only movement that caters for women uniquely is the feminist movement. So regardless of whether or not the feminist movement exists, the existence of Black Lives Matter means that Black people in general will always have some agitation for them. The existence of the LGBTQ movement means that people who identify under that umbrella are always going to be catered for, regardless of whether or not the feminist movement exists. Where you are more likely to protect women is where you then focus on those common struggles that these other movements are unlikely to cater for. So it means that as a basic woman, you likely, if you are Black and you are gay, you likely have some benefits that you generate from the LGBTQ movement, regardless of whether or not the feminist movement engages in this. You likely have some benefits that you generate from the Black Lives Matter movement, regardless of whether or not women engage in this. What you do not have is someone who uniquely caters to women, irrespective of all of these things and the struggles that are common to women. What this external establishes is our world is the most optimal world for all women because you're most likely to cater for them cohesively. This means that the feminist movement provides little or marginal support to say people who exist within external movements, but it's likely that we prioritize issues that are common to all of women, which means that women in our world are likely to feel better. How does this affect how much you achieve your goals? Number one, we explain how internal cohesion is already a precursor to any external benefits that you want. So if you have people opting out of your movement, for example, because they don't agree with the ideals that you're pushing both internally and externally, you're never going to be able to achieve good. Two, you lose even more political will that you've generated over time, which means that you have to start building constantly or wasting time like clarifying identity. But three, we explain to you how women are catered for within those other movements exclusive of the feminist movement, but the only movement that caters for the unique experience of womanhood is the feminist movement. Why are you more likely to then generate cohesion here? Number one, we think that it's easier to get agreement on women on things that are prior and directly related to womanhood than it is to get on ideas that are external to them, to say things like race, where white women may not be able to relate or have different experiences. The reason why this is then better is that you're more likely to have general support for all women on the things that matter most to women, which is womanhood. The reason why this is better than their world is that you constantly have that internal fracturing. That means that you're never able to achieve anything, but it's even more likely that the feminist movement stops working.
Starting in three, two, one. Panel, I think it's very, very important that you understand that there is a huge flaw in Alex's case because one of the most important things he misses from Prime Minister is that Prime Minister is able to identify why that shared suffering is something that exists across all boards. And since he tells you the mechanism of how women exist within spaces that are beyond just feminism, he tells you about the Black Lives Matter movement. He tells you about the existing LGBTQ movement. He even tells you as far as how these individuals exist in other social movements that ultimately affect womanhood. That's the problem with their case. You don't know that their case is just a blanket case that often says, oh, this is about womanhood. But that's the problem. He also identifies the limitation of what womanhood is able to identify. Most times, what womanhood is able to identify are the things that are intrinsically traditional to them. So it's most likely not going to cater for a woman who is bisexual. It's most likely not going to cater the most for a woman who is black. They say because you are intrinsically a woman, it means it helps you. If that is the case, it means you wouldn't have intersectional feminism where you often have women who are more disenfranchised than others. It is the fact that you have unique suffering that exists within status quo is the reason why this intersectional solidarity is one that we should prioritize because at the end of the day, it's a blanket sign that you can't cater for everything. The intrinsic idea of womanhood is one that is isolatory and doesn't allow the feminist movement to be wholehearted and necessarily move and peer into issues that are deeper than it. A few things from opening position I want to take out. The first is I say women are the most oppressed individuals. And this makes a lot of sense because it proves what Teslim says. If women are the most oppressed individuals, it means they are oppressed even outside feminism. They are oppressed when they exist in LGBTQ. They are oppressed when they exist in political structures. They are oppressed when they exist in different structures that oftentimes intrinsic womanhood often cannot cater for. It means that there is a limitation at which their body is able to achieve the impact of solvency, given that they ignore the proximity of shared suffering that often exists within these particular proximities. But secondly, they talk about, internal sustainability, how you erode the internal sustainability of the feminist movement. This makes no sense because number one, our word never says that you have to solely defend a black man. The truth of the matter is simple. If the feminist movement can be able to prioritize certain groups that often has women in them that are extended away from the intrinsic idea of womanhood, it ultimately means that number one, when you create benefits for these particular individuals, it means that you are able to remove abuse from all areas of of society. So, for example, when you remove the abuse on transgendered men, when you remove the abuse on bisexual women, when you remove the abuse on black women, and all those intersectional groups, Mexican women, what does this do? It means it directly impacts even the feminist movement. It ultimately means that people feel comfortable when they come into that particular movement. People feel comfortable because they understand that their own intrinsic values are things that are often valuable and things that we should buy and use into. Why are we better? Number one, in terms of proximity, right? And this idea is very, very important. It's the reason why I'm reiterating it again. But since that these intersectional groups are often closer to the feminists than we think, and how is this true? I just want to give an intuition pop and use an example as my mechanism. First thing is that within the LGBT community, people who choose to switch genders often face abuse for it, especially when women, especially men who choose to change their identities. Why is this a problem? What this means is that the attack is in itself when they get abused. It's not an attack on just them wanting to become women. It's an attack on womanhood because what it ultimately says is that look, you are illegitimate at the point where you choose to become a woman or you choose to carry out that identity, regardless of whether or not it is wrong for you to change that identity in itself. It means that there is already an intrinsic attack on the idea of intrinsic womanhood that ultimately thinks that feminism and the way in which it uses solidarity within status quo doesn't seek to correct. We think when you have those isolations, it ultimately means you cannot create comfortable ecosystems, comfortable areas for which these women are able to exist within. It means our world ultimately creates a blanket and a more intrinsic way by which we solve the problems of women across all boards. Given that women exist in different stratas of life, we think it is still legitimate. What happens when you even necessarily impact black men, right? We think that number one, in a situation where you are able to change and at least create more mechanisms that ultimately create better systems for women, it ultimately means at the end of the day, women will live better lives. Women will be able to identify better. Women will have better things that oftentimes are not just tied to womanhood because their problems spread beyond womanhood. Second thing I want to talk about is the impact of this particular argumentation. Number one, women exist in the realities of other intersectional categories and groups. Creating solvency in those areas means that you ultimately create solvency for the feminist movement themselves. It means that there are less things to fight about. It means there are less things to complain about. But secondly, when you reduce abuse in LGBT communities, this directly translates to core feminists because at the end of the day, it means they can express their agency just even beyond womanhood and their ability to change. But secondly, is the extension on the importance of coagulation. Panel, notice that the feminist movement in itself has a limit by which it can reach and extend its goals. Given that there are so many problems that affect society right now and why those share suffering in themselves ultimately create a world where you need to be able to form these coagulations in themselves. Number one, what is shared suffering within the context of the debate? Notice that historically, things like disenfranchisement, I think that do not only just affect feminists, they also affect individuals who have been deemed stigmatic in society, who have been socially abused, socially cast out. We think that when you solve this particular problem, you change the narrative for not just individuals, you change the narrative for every minority group, which then proves our impact of how you are able to create sovereignty for the core feminists in themselves, because it means that they are able to express their agency even beyond when they are not looked as women and that and those particular things. Move on.
The Black Lives Matter movement is supporting in terms of, oh, we think they should not have killed George Floyd. But they probably won't support you saying you want a female president.
But then that's an assertion, please. That's an assertion because you assert that, oh, we don't want to necessarily choose you when you want to bring a female president. And explain to me why you have Kamala Harris. Explain to me why you have so many individuals who are necessarily going to this particular spaces. It makes no sense. Please, Benzine, do better. The third extension I want to bring is that the problem of basing feminist solidarity, strictly on womanhood. But so, number one, isolatory, like it is isolatory and limits alliances. Why is this true? Most time men often want to be sympathetic, empathetic. What you often have is that you have groups of individual feminists who often say, because of how the lack of the ability to have this certain model means that you often deject this particular individual, which means number one, the ability to create solvency is limited because oftentimes it is not realistic enough. Most people cannot join the movement and not be alliances because oftentimes they often propound the narrative that because you do not share the ideas of woman, you cannot be part of us, which means the ability to gain solvency is limited given that they do not have the ability to create more manpower through alliances. Why are alliances important? Most times alliances often change the narrative for even patriarchy itself. Most times it says that even if men can join us and all those movements can join us, it means that there's a reason why we can necessarily create more change for individuals. The last thing I want to talk about is what happens when you solve these problems. Number one, when you often solve these problems for women, right? When you often do things like coagulate with other groups, join other groups, solve their problems, you are creating a narrative that number one, no sign of oppression is allowed to exist within society, which necessarily translates back to what Teslim says. If you are going to be consistent with your principle, it means you should not stand idly by when other things or other individuals who historically share the same levels of disenfranchisement, the ability to not access certain structures, suffer like you. It ultimately means that if you do not do these things, even when they break down those particular structures, they will come to you. When you particularly create these particular solidarity mechanisms, it ultimately means that you show no room for vulnerability and the ability to create more coagulation. For this and many more, we are proud to come from the government.
All right. Uh, I'll be starting my speech in. Wait, sorry. Okay. All right. So I'll be starting my speech in three, two, one. Panel the House. The entire opening government have failed to show how these intersectional categories of oppression are tailored specific to the feminist movement, seeing as their major oppressor is the patriarchy that exists solely on the basis of the male identity. What this means is that men can claim to be feminists, right? But women can't come out and say, I am a patriarch. Why? Because for you to be a patriarch, it is intrinsically, like, it means that you have to be intrinsically male in today's society. What this means is that the imbalance in terms of identification of political categories is one that is illegitimate, especially when the debate asks us which the feminist movement should prioritize. The second thing is that the basis for prioritization is that it is something that gives the movement the ability to achieve its goals faster and better. What this means is that for that to happen, the members of the movement need to be able to identify with the movement on an intrinsic level where they can all relate to each other despite their different experiences. Which is why Alex makes the example of, oh, you can have black women, oh, you can have LGBTQ women, but the fact that these people have different ideologies, the only way in which you have something that is intrinsic, something that is general to all of their experiences, is when you begin to prioritize womanhood. Womanhood is the only one that gives women that intrinsic level of collectivity. This clarification is important because of the importance I'll be giving. Social movement differs for certain reasons. One, they differ in what they prioritize because what they prioritize defines their narratives. The second thing is that the people they prioritize. The third thing is that the minority they prioritize and they represent. Why this is important? The feminist movement was not born out of a need to save everyone or every minority in society. It was born because of the years of marginalization and oppression of women. So it means that for you to maintain a single story, for you to maintain that narrative of fighting for women's oppression, you need to prioritize womanhood. The second thing is that Black Lives Matter already prioritized Black people. Backlash also exists on trans men. So that is to say, women who change their genders already experience backlash. That is why Alex already tells you that backlash exists already, both externally. But where it becomes problematic is that when you begin to prioritize this intersectionality, the backlash that will exist internally would lead to the fragmentation of the movement. Why the fragmentation of the movement is important is because they already tell you, oh, these people do not have enough manpower. Oh, these people do not have enough support. When you begin to prioritize things that lead to the fragmentation of the movement, it means that you begin to lose manpower. It means that you begin to lose that same thing that they are fighting for. The idea of manpower is that we already have more women in the world as it stands currently. The population of women are definitely more than the population of men. The reason the manpower is less because the feminist movement no longer prioritizes women, especially as Alex already told you that already other movements exist that prioritize other minorities. So that is to say, women who are black can be catered on under the Black Lives Matter. But the Black Lives Matter would not necessarily cater for every woman that exists in society. If you prioritize women, black women, trans women also fall under the umbrella of that means the prioritization of womanhood will somehow cater to these minorities that already exist, right? The moment you start to prioritize intersectionality, it becomes problematic because their experiences differs, their ideologies differs. What this difference means is that you will keep changing priorities. Why? Because you are chasing intersectionality. And for you to get intersectionality, it means that these ideas have to intersect or have to combine. So the fact that different ideas already exist within status quo means that before you can get ideas that insert, there will be multiple layers of these things that happen. So it means that the feminist movement is always going to keep chasing different narratives because of they are trying to seek for its intersectionality, which means that people or society itself no longer know what you stand for because you keep changing narrative, because you keep changing ideas, because you keep changing the people you prioritize. People in society no longer know what you stand for, And if they don't know what you stand for, then they cannot even support you. I'll take a look at. All right. Last thing from our side of the bench is that we've been able to, like Alex already clarifies that, the reason social movements exist is because of what they prioritize or what the ideology they stand for. The POI he asked Teslim is to show that from Alex's POI, if the people in the Black Lives Matter care so much about women that they want to prioritize women, they will be feminists. This is the idea. Patriarchs already exist in other social movements. So misogynists can push for the safety and better treatment of black people. So you can have black patriarchal men push for the idea that black people should be treated better. But you would never see these black patriarchs or you would never see these black misogynists, regardless of whether let's not even say black misogynists. You would never see patriarchs or misogynists who are intrinsic support women. That is to say, you would never get that level of prioritization of women when you chase intersectionality. What's your POI?
What causes fragmentation is that a transgender woman has to be a feminist or a woman. In our world, we are just coming together to find a common goal. That's the case.
In your word, you're coming together to fight a common goal is heavily dependent on how the people you are relating with support you. So that is to say, if these people do not give you the ultimate support, your ability to pursue your own goal is detrimental, is minimal, is very low. So it means that the success of your own movement is actually heavily dependent on the people you can latch onto. What this means is that not everybody within that movement might support you. So it means that the buy-in you're going to get is very, very small. To the extent where we prove that, misogynists already exist in this movement you are trying to latch onto. Patriarchs already exist in this movement you are trying to latch onto. Then you have to show the likelihood of success that when I latch onto these people are going to support my movement, these people are going to support my ideology, and these people are going to prioritize me. What do you get from our side of the bench? When you prioritize womanhood, you give every woman within the world an intrinsic level of collectivism because it is something they can identify with. The second thing is that society already knows what you prioritize, society already knows what you stand for, and society can even fight for you because they know that you have a clear vision of the ideology you are trying to push. The counterfactual is that when you begin to chase intersectionality, it means that you have to look for every other movement that tries to intersect with you, regardless of if the fact that some members or most members within this movement do not necessarily buy your idea or do not necessarily support you. Proud to come from opposition.
I'm dedicating this speech to Ayafa. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this debate is about the inclusion of other identities aside from womanhood into the feminist movements. We think from governments that womanhood should not be the sole determining factor for entry into the feminist movement. I'm going to show you why this is going to be very, very important for the feminist movement at large, but also for these oppressed people. But then let's talk about the nature of intersectionality, because I think that that's a kind of messy conversation in the opening half. So what intersectionality actually looks like is a couple of things. So first of all, things like transgender people, right? Things like men, but men on all levels of a social class. For example, rich men, poor men, black men, white men, all those stratas of people. So it's like comparing the two of them, right? So it's either you are either born a woman and you can join into the feminist movement, or you can be a man, you can be transgender, and you can be led into the feminist movement. That's the comparison. We're going to show you why it is important for these other set of people to be included into the feminist movement. We think, first of all, that these groups of people, because of the nature of intersectionality, suffer similar levels of oppression. We don't think that the level of oppression is identical, but there's an overlap. That is literally what intersectionality means. It means that a black man likely suffers certain levels of oppression that are very similar to what a woman faces, whether or not she's rich, white, or whatever it is. We think then that the feminist movement, not including them, still ends up fighting for their own goals. So this is very important to engage open opposition when they say that the goals of the feminist movement are going to be changed. Like the literal definition of intersectionality is that there's an overlap between your problems. What this means is that you can easily fight for those problems that you have that intersectionality about, and then you don't need to change the goals, but I'll engage that later. But then we think that the feminist movement is basically fighting for the rights of these people without necessarily including them. What does that mean, and why is that very important? It means that if the feminist movement, first of all, advocates for things like better corporate culture because a woman is stereotyped or harmed within the corporate world, it means that other people also benefit from it, but those people are not active members of the feminist movement, so they are not contributing anything to actually making those type of goals become reality. We think it harms the feminist movement in a couple of ways. The first thing is that basically they are wasting their resources. It means that they could have extra people join this movement, get all these levels of goals faster, and like achieve it faster and all of that. But then secondly, right, we think that these people are benefiting from the goals of the feminist movement and from all the things that they are doing, but they are not actively contributing from it. We think it's very important to include them. We achieve the goals of the feminist movement faster. But then what are the goals of political categories? Because I think that that's very important in today's debate. First of all, to create meaningful change within society, to advocate for the goals of whatever it is your movement is advocating for, and to create like sustainable change. We think that having womanhood as the sole political category for entry into the feminist movement is a net negative to the feminist movement in the first place. I'm going to talk about why women in themselves do not have the capacity to achieve the goals of their movement alone, and this is directly going to engage open opposition. The first thing here is that for any political movement to be successful in status quo, the members need to possess certain amount of resources, abilities, and all of that. They need to be able to do things like lobby government institutions, sponsor social media campaigns, hold rallies, and all of that. They concede to this when they say that women are oppressed and all of that, because women in status quo generally do not possess the qualities to interact with government and change systemic issues and all of that by themselves. This is true because women generally have less access to things like education, job opportunities in status quo, and they prioritize things like maternal responsibilities. They have to succumb to a lot of societal pressures and stereotypes. These are the reasons why women on their own, as a bloc, cannot achieve all the goals that they want to achieve. We don't think that that exclusivity is a net positive to the feminist movement. But then second thing here is on numbers, right? In general, we think that there are a lot of people that generally want to join into this feminist movement. I think it's very, very important for you to include them because it just improves your numbers. We don't think that the goals of the feminist movement are going to be watered down because you include these people. Because note, in 2025, the conversation around the feminist movement has drastically shifted. The people that want to enter into the feminist movement are not coming in to change the entire narrative. They're coming in because they are sympathetic to your pleas and your cries. I don't think that like we are in 1990 anymore. Most of those arguments cannot fly. Closing. Yeah, so I'm not really sure. I'm so sorry, please. So why the core goals of the feminist movement will not be affected? I think that that's a very important conversation to have because that's the case of open opposition. I'm going to prove to you why it's unlikely that that will happen. The first thing here is on the nature of intersectionality. It means that somebody who is an LGBTQ person or like a transgender person has the LGBTQ movement to cater to their needs. So the feminist movement doesn't need to advocate for things like safe spaces for them, things like bathrooms, things like all of that, because the LGBTQ movement already exists to cater to that. What the feminist movement is going to prioritize when you include these people into their movement is those problems that overlap with them. It's not going to go and start prioritizing things like, all those surgeries and all of that. Those are not the things that intersect. Those are not the things that they are going to prioritize. But then secondly, right, we think that these people already have individual movements that cater to them on a large scale, right? But then thirdly, right, we think that these people also understand why they are joining the movement. So if you include a man today in feminist movement, he's not going to come and like want to overrun it, overtake it, or try to do all of those things. We think the nature of conversations around social media, around this movement have changed. But then even if, right, worst case scenario, the core goals change, we think that it's a trade-off that we are willing to make. Because at the end of the day, For the longest time, the feminist movement has been stalling, and most of their goals have not yet been achieved. If we can get these numbers, get these people with the actual capacity to make actual change, we think that's a necessary trade-off to make. Because at the end of the day, we don't think that your goals are even going to be diluted to that extent that they want to say that, oh, nobody's going to care about women anymore because you've included men into the feminist movement. That's a very extreme case to run. But then, secondly, right, we think that there are also internal mechanisms for correction with every social media, with every social movement, right? It's never stagnant. You can always reevaluate, revise, and do things like that. We are no longer, I don't think all those arguments are going to run. But then thirdly is the unique nature of how the feminist movement positions itself on social media. There's always conversations about it. So at the point where you are drifting away from your goals because the movement has included people, as they say that that's what's going to happen, we think that there are a lot of mechanisms that can backlash against you, that can call out all these issues, and you can have discussions. We're very proud to come from closing goals.
Where's time? I thought there was a phone here. Okay. Okay. So I'll begin in three, two, one. Honestly, it's golf teams don't recognize the clarity in the motion because the motion is a comparative between recognizing the differences in the oppression of women. Say, for example, if you are the problem a black woman face is different from the problem a white woman face. Should feminism incorporate various levels of oppression in terms of what women face into their struggle, or should they see women suffering from one thing, which is patriarchy? That's the debate. So what they say, especially coming from CG, they are so confused that feminism should focus on what overlaps. You're supporting our side because the extent of womanhood is that they focus on the commonality of what overlaps, which is patriarchy in this regard, and not necessarily the extent of different suffering. So the commonality of that overlapping is our side in this particular regard. But then that's what OG also falls in line with, because the extent of commonality is something that is better achieved in our world when we face this sort of problem. Our extensions would be in two folds. First, I would engage to you why patriarchy should be the primary focus a primary focus as opposed to focusing on other problems. Because if feminists is to view all women as one, that is, all women suffers from patriarchy, the trade-off is that we wouldn't see more of you being black and then focus on you suffering from racism or suffering from homophobia. So we view you from the lens of patriarchy. So that's the debate. So should we view you from the lens of a woman suffering from homophobia, right? Or view from a woman suffering from patriarchy itself? Meaning there have to be that analysis as to why patriarchy should be the focal value. Why should patriarchy be the problem in terms of value that should be prioritized over other categories of oppression? That's basically the debate. Read the info slide. It's a comparison between other categories of oppression and patriarchy. We are going to prove that to you within this particular regard. That's what Odin do. We have three mechanisms to prove this. The first is that patriarchy covers every subject of problem in advocacy. The basis of every struggle and the base of every struggle women face, even if they are diverse in nature to a large extent, are ultimately tied to patriarchy. How is this true? The first is that the essential segregation of women off of the base of the agenda breeds other problems. So it means to a large extent, you need to focus on the root of the problem to solve this particular thing. Why is this true? because of the three waves of feminism: equal pay for women and voting franchise. These are things that focus on dismantling patriarchy and ensure that these particular problems do not more likely exist. How does it solve the problem? First, it tackles the problem from the root. In what way? The first way is that, to a large extent, the extent of class and the extent to which women do not receive equal pay make them more susceptible to other problems. How? Because classism, to a large extent, more likely shield certain women from certain things. This is why that the problem, this is why that since Michelle Obama is rich, the problem Michelle Obama faces in terms of patriarchy is automatically so limited than the problem a poor black woman faces. It means, to a large extent, it is class disparity caused as a result of unequal pay perpetuated by patriarchy. So it means that if you can equate the level of funding women get in comparison to men by emphasizing on an advocacy that clamps down on patriarchy in this particular regard, women, to a large extent, could use their funds to, to immune themselves to other levels of problem in two ways. First, one, funds grant you some certain level of social capital. That means that you have more control over hegemonic media, getting more PR for yourself in this particular regard. Two, it means with funding, you could proselytize certain rights that ensure that even if homophobia exists against you, to a large extent, people can't come out against you because of the magnanimity of funds you control. But then secondly, the class you control in this particular regard ultimately tied to the level of unequal gender pay. Meaning, the problem is worse off on their side. This is how I'll comparatively engage their world. The problem is worse off on their side. In their side, you don't get that level of funding. How? Because to a large extent, these different factions compete against themselves. So the extent to which various LGBTQ plus II have to get funding are in direct proximity as to how you prove that you are more better than the existing movements before you. But then secondly, the extent of factions that exist within feminism, like outside feminism, ultimately means that the Black Lives Matter prioritize its own funding over LGBTQ within this particular regard. So it means that if feminism is to go into that particular fund tussle, two things happen. First, you distract yourself, because to a large extent, you have to prove that your movement can confidently portray Black life and blackness over the extent of patriarchy. Meaning, the level of consistency you get, you don't get that on that side because you polarize that level of advocacy. You need consistency for advocacy to more likely occur to that. You don't get that level of funding. The extent of consistency breeds that level of funding that you can get. But then the second way to which you don't get funding on their side that level the playing field of funding is the extent to which it is not fluid in terms of consistency. The extent of other social movements are, to a large extent, the rise of leftist narrative that ensure that all these particular things are fluid. So today I could wake up and say I'm a woman or I'm a cat, or to a large extent I can say I'm lesbian or identify as another thing. Meaning, identity in their world is fluid and changes over time. This is the comparison. In our world, the historical form that feminism, that the advocacy against feminism has taken a political form and a political stance. This analysis is key because it's proved to a large extent the extent to which the prioritization of patriarchy over other sectarian problems has taken political forms from decadence and various historical precedents from the third wave feminism into political structures. Two things this proves to you. A political form is more sustainable in appearance because it's solidified in systems and in various institutions within those particular movements. This is the comparison. In their world, identity is fluid. Two, it is new, which is a new leftist rising narrative which hasn't taken a political form yet. Three, the mere fact that it is fluid means that it can change anytime. Sustainability is better achieved in our world because of two things. One, historical longevity. But then two, it has taken political form over the years because the perversity in terms of how the politicization of feminism has happened by time has taken political forms. Sustainability ensures advocacy, but then how you get funding and equal pay more likely ensure that you achieve better how it solve remains for them. We give it to CEO in this regard.
Okay, I start my speech in three, two, one. I think there's a very big problem with what closing opposition says and what their case basically is in today's debate. So basically, what they tell you guys is that that women suffer from the ideologies of patriarchy and how patriarchy has necessarily ruined the feminist movement or ruined the womanhood movement. And then they tell you that these intersectional categories focus on a different level of struggle that is not patriarchy. Now, the two of them are linked basically, right? So we're still getting the same level of solutions. But how exactly does that look like? What exactly does that look like? So basically, women suffer from things like, abuse, right? Things like discrimination. In intersectional categories, these people are examples like, transgender, LGBTQ. These trans people also suffer from abuse. They also suffer from discrimination. So if the women suffer from abuse, and that abuse is based upon the fact of patriarchy, trans LGBTQ people suffer from things like abuse and all of that. And all those things are still tied down to patriarchy in itself. It's simple. If an example of an intersectional category is the black person, for example, the black person suffers based off on his skin color. What exactly brought about the racism of skin color in the first place? It was the nature of how patriarchy was to begin with. So it's simple, right? Even those levels of like it's simple. Intersectional categories also suffer from patriarchy, right? All these things are still linked in somewhat way. So at the end of the day, the same solutions that you're trying to cater for on your side of the house, you still get it on this side of the house, right? Now, very importantly, what exactly do you get from open opposition in today's debate? They tell you a couple of things, and their biggest case as to why they say that government doesn't, or why we do not have a case in today's debate, is that there is no word that exclusively caters for the feminist movement like theirs. Now, Joanne already tells you a couple of things. Firstly, that the reason why you're not even likely to get any solutions or this exclusive caterment is because, first, these people do not have the necessary resources that they would need to even achieve the level of achievement and objectives that the feminist movement even want in themselves. So what does that look like? It looks like, they are always likely catered, or the nature of which women are structured is in such that, they are always linked to maternal duties, maternal cares, and all of that. It therefore means that, they do not have as necessary resources as they can to be able to fight off these big struggles and these big demerits that they currently face in status quo, right? But then, even if we now necessarily do not have that, or even if we now have a movement that does not necessarily cater for the feminist movement in isolation, we think that it is not bad. Why? Because the nature of these intersectional categories and the nature of these problems, and that these problems are things that are necessarily overlapping in status quo. So what does that look like? It looks like, even though your problems are exclusively catering for women, you're still able to get those level of problems solved on this side. Why? And then we think that if you're even like, exclusivity is not all on our side of the house. The fact that you're able to merge all these problems, you're able to merge feminism movement, you're able to merge trans, black people, and all of that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The exclusivity solvency or solutions that you're trying to look for don't necessarily give you as much results as you want, because you still do not have the level of resources, the level of materials, and the level of caterments that you need to get you some level of solutions that you're looking for. So it's simple. If on our own side of the house you're able to cater for these women, but even more still, you're able to cater for them on the faster level of rate, on the faster level of access, because there are more resources, there are more opportunities that avail them. You're necessarily able to get more level of solutions, more level of impact, more levels of actually catering for the feminist movement on outside of the house. But then the second thing that they tell you is that, and then Joanne also does something, right, and tells you on how this nature of intersectionality looks like. These people paint it like as though the people that actually exist in these intersectional categories are people that don't necessarily understand the levels of struggles and things that these women have faced. It's simple. If a man is a part of is a level of intersectional category, these men have things like sisters, these men have things like cousins that are females as well. So it's simple, right? Even if I have certain relatives that are females, and because of that, I'm able to understand that there's a certain level of problems that these people still face. Like the problems that they talk about that they are trying to solve or exist still also happens in our world, right? But then a couple level of other things, they tell you that, that priorities keep changing in this feminist movement. So it's problematic because these people do not no longer know what they stand for. We think that that's less likely to happen, first of all, because Joanne already tells you the level of how these people already have access to more resources that will still cater for their problems. But even if these priorities do change, we think that even if they do, the genuine uniqueness of all these priorities is that there are still things like discrimination, there are still things like abuse and all those level of things. So even if we have priorities changing, all of them are still linked to level of sufferings that women or other categories still face in this level of places. So it's simple, right? Even if those priorities do change, like there's no difference because we're still basically solving all that we do at the end of the day. We think that there's no problem with social media or with the world knowing that, oh, you're trying to solve different level of things at a certain level of time. We're still prioritizing a whole lot of things that exist or a whole lot of problems that exist in status quo. But then why exactly do we now win today's debate, right? Very, very simple. Because we think that we give to a very large extent the level of mechanization that is needed to be able to win this level of debate. So what exactly does Joanne tell you? What exactly have we shown you from today's debate? A couple level of things that, oh, even if the intersectional problems that we talk about are literally problems that overlap with what the feminist movement already face. And it's simple, right? If we're already trying to solve both problems that exist on both sides of the house, we tell you that on our side of the house, we have more access to more resources, we have more access to more capabilities, we have more access to more connections that get us to those level of solutions that we are trying to look for on the feminist movement side of the house. So it's simple. If we're trying to cater for feminist movements in themselves, we are also, if we're trying to cater for feminist movements in themselves, what we then do is that we are linking it to this, and because of these problems that's really overlap, you get more resources, you get more timing, you get more connections that cater for more solutions, cater for more benefits on our own side of the house. But more importantly, right, why is that important? Because we think that the two parts of this house are seeking for a world where we can cater for feminist movement, cater for other level of categories in themselves, right? We already show you how these intersectional categories already have more access to these things. We tell you that even if the feminist movement wants some certain level of solutions, that is still tied down to these overlapping problems that these people still face. So even if we are trying to cater for their world more, we tell you that you're able to get more level of solutions, more levels of analysis on our side of the house. With this, we've never been more proud. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'll begin my speech in. Sorry. I'll begin my speech in three, two, and one. Panel. This thing is simple. If as CG already agrees and the info slide already asserts that every problem and everything is tied back to patriarchy, right? Therefore, it is just logical and reasonable that we focus on the primary issue or the primary problem that is in this debate, solving patriarchy. And we tell you from side CO that that is what we need to focus on. We need to prioritize womanhood because from the info slide, as you will see, it is the advocacy of, or it embodies the advocacy that ensures that we fight, right, against patriarchy and ensures that the feminist movement it would most likely be sustainable in ensuring that they succeed in that entire fight. I'm going to take out CO, then focus on CG, then focus on OG. Because what we first get from CG is one, they tell you that the feminist movement can fight for people without including them. The problem here, right, and they further make that to say, because another thing is, the problem here is this. One, that when you diversify, and Ajake explains to you, that in order for a political movement to be successful, right, that political movement needs two things, right? Fund, one, and also the political form that it takes, which is determined by historical longevity. What that means
is that for that political movement to be successful, the political movement needs to be able to utilize, number one, get funds, but secondly, utilize its funds to focus on the issues that really matter to it. The moment you begin to diversify your focus, the moment you begin to diversify all of those things, what you do is that you do not address the problems you are supposed to be addressing because there is competition on that front because of the differing ideologies that you allow to overlap within your particular, within that particular movement. But secondly, they tell us that, oh, if these guys, benefit from the fight of feminism, but they do not contribute. So we need more people to come in, and more numbers so that they can contribute to the success of feminism. This is the problem here. A lot of people in society benefit from the fight against oppression without necessarily actively contributing to that. It exists. The reason why this is good and is not bad as they claim is simply because the objective of society is towards progress, that everybody within that particular society will live a better life, will have a better life. So if you solve a problem as a social movement, what you inherently do, if that problem also helps other people that did not actively contribute in the fight of that social movement, we think that that is a good thing. That is something that we should not, find reprehensible. But then, thirdly, on their case of numbers, that we need more numbers in the social movement. This is problematic because you can have a lot of people, you can have 100 people, and they will have no effect. If you have considered to the fact that patriarchy is problematic and that already stigmatizing, that already sidelines women within society, then tell me how having more number without necessarily proving whether that numbers have the capacity, whether that numbers have the access to resources or power, tell me how that would help the feminist movement. They did not make that, they did not show that. They just tell us that, oh, we need more numbers. The truth is that for capacity to change, to be effective, you need power, you need resources. This is why Anudc tells you that the feminist movement needs to be able to effectively utilize its resources to achieve its aims. That is the only way the feminist movement is able to ensure sustainability, even if solvency will be late, right? So you can have a lot of people, right, and you will not necessarily gain everything. We think that all of those cases are things that we should not necessarily consider in this debate. Let me take out OG. OG says that one, social movements are selfish, perpetuated by patriarchy, and this idea is perpetuated by patriarchy, all of those kind of things. So there is a lot of backlash. OO replies by saying that social movements need to be selfish, right? Because they need to prioritize their interests. This answer is good. But the reason why this answer is not enough is simply because they did not make the entire need or the capacity that is necessary to ensure the achievement of this interest. So they tell us that, oh, the reason why they need to be selfish is simply because we want to achieve this. But Anudc tells you how that achievement occurs, because you need capacity, you need funds, right? So social movement need to focus on that interest. But OG also says things like, oh, we to achieve all solvency for a lot of people, because women exist across board. Women, you find women in LGBTQ, this in Black Lives Matter, and all of those things. So we should adopt their entire ideologies, because essentially traditional womanhood and all those things will not address this. We think that this is problematic, because when their impact is to say that solvency in one leads to solvency in all, we don't think that that is necessarily true, because you can also still achieve the same thing, right, by not necessarily including them. Because if we agree that the problem is patriarchy, as everybody says, everybody knows, the problem is patriarchy, you don't necessarily need to have them here and then ensure that, oh, these guys, you include them, and then you waste resources, or you try to spread out your resources and all of those kind of things. O's response to this was to say, oh, the feminist movement needs to focus on manpower. They need to focus on their own interests, right? They need to ensure that their own interests prioritize. The problem here is still, they did not make what constitutes this advocacy in and of itself, how they are supposed to achieve it in the first place. Because yes, we agree, you are supposed to focus on your interests, you are supposed to focus and utilize your manpower and resources effectively, but then you need to tell us how they do that. The only thing that tells you how that is achieved is Anudc, because Anudc tells you that advocacy, requires political power and resources in terms of funding. resources in terms of access and power. The reason why we think that the feminist movement as it is now, right, has that necessary power, even though we can say it is not yet there, is because they have existed for a long time. That is the case on the form political ideology takes, like longevity and the rest, right? They have existed for a long time. So it means that to a very large extent, they have accumulated necessary resources to fight for women against patriarchy within society. So when they have this funding, we do not necessarily have to diversify it to cater to several other interests. However, if the fight against patriarchy will help other people, we think that that is good, but the feminist movement don't need to wear it on their head and say, oh, this is what we do. But the final thing that Jacket tells you, and which is why we still win over our opening, is the idea that sustainability is ensured more on our side. Because the only way to achieve sustainability is what? To have funding, right? But secondly, to utilize that funding effectively to have power and resources. We ensure that that movement continues to stay, that movement maintains a consistent ideology that people can identify with and help like their goals. We are proud to oppose.